My name is Ed Mitchell, and in celebration of my 30th birthday, this is my top 10 games of all time. Alright, now it's time for the good stuff. My number 10 favorite game of all time is Assassin's Creed IV Black Flag. I have an interesting history with Assassin's Creed. I was introduced to the first one by watching free game review videos on Hulu, of all places. It introduced this game series where you use the different face buttons in order to control the different parts of the body. Either the left hand with the X, the right hand with the B, the Y button to control his face, or the A button to control his legs. While it was a pretty simple concept, it intrigued me, so I asked for it for Christmas. I still remember opening up the first Assassin's Creed game, and my parents being like, "That's kind of a weird sounding game, Ed, what's going on there?" But fast forward 5 sequels and however many years later, next up was Assassin's Creed IV Black Flag. Now this was an interesting time for the Assassin's Creed series. After the conclusion of the Ezio trilogy and the somewhat tepid response from Assassin's Creed 3, Assassin's Creed 4 had a lot to live up to. And boy did it. Black Flag is arguably the last great Assassin's Creed game. While the new games in the series are probably pretty fun, I found it hard to believe that I could recapture the magic of Black Flag. I think a big part of it for me is the pirate theme. I loved pirates as a kid, especially the fact that Blackbeard and me shared a first name. And if you really had to ask me, this is way more of a pirate game than an Assassin's Creed game. Some of the most exciting stuff was taken from the ship combat of Assassin's Creed 3 and put into this game, but turned up to a whole nother level. Unlike previous games where you pretty much had a single city to roam around in, the vast majority of the map was covered in water, so you had no choice but to sail around on your ship. And I love how the main character, also named Edward, spends almost the entire first act of the game just trying to swindle some people out of some money. And even when he does finally meet some assassins, it really isn't that big a part of the story. So instead of being an Assassin's Creed game, it's a pirate game. You join other pirates on missions, you get to recruit people to your pirate crew, and yes, of course, how could I not mention the sea shanties? That's right, you get to collect and gather songs for your crew to sing as they're sailing around the open seas. It's really just a nice bit of flavor that Ubisoft didn't have to add to this game, but since they did, it made it all the better. It's too bad that there was no future success with the pirate-themed games with Ubisoft, but at least we still have Assassin's Creed IV Black Flag. Alright, at number 9 of my greatest of all time list is Golden Sun: The Lost Age. Golden Sun was the first JRPG I ever played that wasn't Pokemon. So between it and its sequel, Golden Sun: The Lost Age, my mind was completely blown by the scope of which its world, its story, and the gameplay operated at. Let's focus on each one at a time. First off, the world. The world in this game is huge, and it only gets bigger in the sequel. In fact, the main continent that you explore in the original game is actually a rather small part of the overall game world. There ends up being about 20 or so different towns that you visit, and each one has its own culture, its own history, its own way of dealing with outsiders, and its own type of special magic that you get to use in this game. By solving puzzles and completing quests, you usually get to unlock one of these special abilities, which you can then use to complete more puzzles and explore more of the world. Next up is the story. After the prologue, you're studying to become one of the magic users of this world. You end up finding the keys to activate the elemental lighthouses and are tasked by the Great Guardian to save the world from the resurgence of alchemy. While you spend most of the first game trying to chase after the people that stole the elemental stars, in the second game, you end up playing as some of the people that are actually trying to activate the lighthouses, admittedly under duress. Being able to see the perspective of two different groups, not entirely diametrically opposed, but their goals being different, was a concept that a young 10-year-old boy had not experienced. And finally, I wanted to talk about the class system. As you explore around the world, you gather these Jinn, which are little animal creatures that you can attach to yourself to power you up. Now, the Jinn allow you to not only use them in battle, which does various debuffs or damage to the enemy. If you do use them, they end up being stored to power cool looking summons. But there's a couple trade-offs. The Jinn, if you have them equipped, boost your stats or potentially change your class. So you have to make tough decisions on whether you want to use these really powerful summons, or if you want to whittle them down the old-fashioned way with your more powerful characters. And the class system is pretty deep too. There's over 20 classes in the first game and over 25 in the second game. So it really encouraged experimentation with mixing and matching different Jinn in order to create the perfect character class combination between your 4 characters. Golden Sun and its sequel have a lot to offer. Fun turn-based combat, a great story, and deep complex characters. And in my opinion, it's one of the best JRPGs ever made, and also my favorite. Okay, and number 8 comes Halo 2. I first played the original Halo at my neighbor's house. He had recently gotten an Xbox, but was too scared to play through the 343 Guilty Spark level alone. So he jumped into split-screen co-op, and we played through the mission together. I was immediately hooked. We went back to the beginning and replayed through the entire rest of the game in co-op together, and thus began my journey of getting an original Xbox. While I have many fond memories of playing the original Halo, especially for the PC version online with friends, Halo 2 brought something more to the series. To start off, Bungie added a bunch of new features to the combat, like hijacking vehicles, dual-wielding weapons, being able to actually use the energy sword, the fuel rod gun, being able to drive the Wraith. All things that changed the balance of the multiplayer and made the single player more fun. And while I'm at it, I'll go ahead and mention the multiplayer. I had played so many hours of split screen and system link Halo 1 that when Halo 2 came to the scene and it had Xbox Live support, it completely changed my understanding of what games could do. Now granted, I know that people were playing Quake and Doom online way before Halo did it, but Halo is what brought me to the scene, so it has a fond place in my heart. Finally, I just want to mention Halo 2's story. I love how this game opens up with a cutscene from the Covenant's point of view. Prior to this, the Covenant were just kind of nameless enemies, but this gave them a personality, a backstory, and being able to play as the Arbiter was a huge surprise when it happened. Honestly, I think Halo 2 was peak Halo. Sure, Halo 3 was probably mechanically better, but Halo 2 set the gold standard for online multiplayer console shooters. And that's why I believe it's one of my favorite games of all time. Coming up on number 7 on my list is the Talos Principle. In my last video when I was talking about Portal 2 and The Witness, I mentioned that my favorite genre of video games is first-person puzzlers. In my opinion, the Talos Principle is one of the greatest first-person puzzlers ever made. The game begins with you as an android who, after being woken up, is instructed to explore the world. This world is populated with a bunch of little puzzle rooms that you have to solve in order to obtain these little Tetris pieces. And then after solving all the puzzle rooms in the area, you can use these Tetris pieces to unlock the next area. As you complete these puzzles and unlock new areas, you unlock new puzzle components as well. Some are as simple as a box that you can put stuff on top of or weigh down switches with. Some are like jammers, which allow you to disable force fields or turrets. All these different mechanics are added on top of each other. Some rooms have a couple of them, some rooms only have one, and the different combinations and permutations of these mechanics keep the game interesting. In addition to this, most rooms and worlds have the ability to kind of like break out of the world, break the rules, so to speak, so that you can unlock these challenge stars with which you can then use to access additional puzzles. And that's just the base mechanics of the game. Overlaying that is a meta story element where you're challenging the concepts of free will and consciousness. The narrative is delivered through an almost mud-like experience where you're talking to a computer AI and asking challenging philosophical questions. These questions really make you think about the nature of life and what it means to be human. It's pretty impressive that such a highbrow puzzle game came out of the team that made Serious Sam. And now that it's on Android, iOS, and Nintendo Switch, it can get all that much more love. The puzzles in here are tough, but not too tough. They really trust the player to be able to solve them. If anyone is a fan of puzzle games like I am, you absolutely cannot go wrong with picking up the Talos Principle. Alright, number 6 is a little game called Dishonored. This is one of those games where everything in it feels so novel. I mean, the entire nation's economy basically runs on killing whales, harvesting their whale oil to use as fuel for their various machinery. And there's also this creepy undertone when it comes to the stuff about the outsider, considering he's the one who gives you your magic powers, and if you just wander around in the different levels, you find his runes that allow you to power up your abilities. These runes are usually found in areas that are either hidden, off the beaten path, or surrounded by the people that are all diseased and zombie-like. So let's take a moment to talk about the different magical abilities you have. Spells like Devouring Swarm, Wind Blast, and Dark Vision are cool and all, but it's Blink and Possession that really change the way the game is played. Blink allows you to teleport in front of you and to a limited extent above you, which totally opens up the verticality of this game. And then Possession allows you to traverse the maps and go into places that you wouldn't normally be able to otherwise, like as a rat going through grates in the walls, or as a fish swimming through the bars in a closed gate. This really opens up your options for choosing how and where you want to take out your target, and significantly increases the replayability of these missions. While Dishonored wasn't my first immersive sim, that award going to Deus Ex Human Revolution, the unique world, the cool abilities, and the sheer amount of exploration you can do in each level elevates it to one of my favorite games of all time. Alright, now let's go into my top 5 games of all time. Number 5 is Bloodborne. While I'll admit there's a huge hole in my gaming history by not having played any of the Dark Souls games, Bloodborne was the reason that I got my PS4. Since then, I've become a huge From Software fanatic, between Sekiro, the Demon's Souls remake, and this year, Elden Ring. So while I can't speak to what Dark Souls does better than Bloodborne, I can say that all the greatest parts of From Software's combat from the series is present in Bloodborne. While I know the Dark Souls series uses shields for parrying, I think the gun parrying mechanic in this game is way cooler. And the weapons that can switch from one form to another adds a whole other level of on-the-fly combat in comparison to just being able to switch between weapons. While you truly feel like a badass going around with all these weapons in your arsenal, it doesn't stop the atmosphere from giving off this creepy vibe. Even the first area you enter is a city swarming with these werewolf-type people. And of course, the Forbidden Woods and the Nightmare of Mensis areas are incredibly memorable as well. This game has all the staples that make From Software's games so addicting. The interconnected worlds, the boss fights that are both beautiful, creepy, and of course, incredibly difficult as well. And it's all packed into this world and lore of this like eldritch horror kind of theme. And I don't really know what it is about that theme that's so appealing to me. Maybe it was just my first From Software game, and so that had a greater impact on me than I thought. I don't know, sometimes I think of games in the sense of how quickly do they grab me. There was almost no time between when I stuck the game in, started playing, and was immediately gripped by Bloodborne. It was all I played for months after the game came out. It was all I was thinking about while I was at work. So while I haven't had a chance to go back and revisit it since I played the Old Hunters DLC, this is definitely one of those games where as soon as they release a remaster or even just a PS5 patch for this, I will dive right back in. Coming in at number 4 on my list is Hollow Knight. Now it should come to no surprise to people that I am a huge fan of Hollow Knight. While I'm sad to say that I didn't make it on my list the year that it came out, I have since played through it once on PC, once on Switch, and then once more as a Steel Soul run. Well, once more as a Steel Soul run isn't exactly accurate. I definitely died at least 3 times in Steel Soul, causing me to have to start over my run. But I think that shows that there's something comfortable about this game. While sure, the bosses are hard, and the Souls-like formula definitely lends itself to you dying a lot, the combat itself feels fluid, and jumping, gliding, and dashing around this game world feels really good too. Each biome has a unique look to it, and combined with the beautiful soundtrack, you really get a sense of place in every new region that you explore. I love the feeling you get when you're exploring a new area, and basically your only goal is to find where Cornifer is so you can unlock the map. And even when you get the map, you only get a small section of the region, which is canonically where Cornifer was able to explore. Everything else is still undiscovered country, undiscovered areas for you to fill in yourself. The characters and their interactions with you make you feel like they're part of this world just as much as you are. Who knew that you could make a world consisting entirely of bugs and insects be endearing? Going back to the combat real quick, I love the fact that you can mix and match the charms, which gives every combination a unique feel and take on the combat. Hollow Knight really managed to capture that sense of discovery and the addictive quality that Metroidvanias give every time you unlock a new item or a new power-up. While it's a huge bummer that I didn't manage to make this on my list for 2017, I'm really happy to say it is still one of my favorite games of all time. Alright, my top 3 favorite games. This one has to be Mass Effect 1. I think the entire Mass Effect series is great. However, Mass Effect 1 holds a special place in my heart simply because of the conversations that happened with my friends around this game at the time. Around the time Mass Effect 2 was coming up for release, we decided to pick up Mass Effect 1 and play it kinda at the same time. I don't really remember if it was like a Steam sale or maybe one of our parents got it for us or something like that. But all I remember is that once we started playing the game, it was all we could talk about at school. And I mean like all we could talk about. I spent hours just poring over the in-game data log just to get more information about the world. Granted, this is coming from a time where I played World of Warcraft extensively. The world building, the characters, the races, it's something that, like, I hadn't experienced other than in a fantasy RPG. While you couldn't roll a character in these different races, you got to play with them as your party members. Liara, Rex, Tali, and Garrus are some of the most memorable characters in all of video game history. And that was just in the first game. I love how you're pretty much just thrust right into the action in this game. Some words are thrown around, you know you're in space, all that good stuff. But it's not till after the first mission that all the real conversation and establishment of the game world takes place. The approach to the Citadel is still one of my favorite moments in video games. Not to mention when Shepard is promoted to a Spectre, or that first conversation that you have with Sovereign. There's also like the creepy atmosphere that you get on Pharos with the Thorian, and just the general feeling of there's this underground conspiracy that you don't realize you're a part of until you're deep into it. Mass Effect 1 established a space epic like nothing ever seen before in video games. It is a classic space opera on the level of Star Wars, Star Trek, and The Expanse. But in a video game, like no game has done something like this ever before or really since. The memories I've made playing this game and playing this game with friends, despite it being a single player game, is one of the highlights of my gaming career. If you haven't had a chance to play these games, go buy the Legendary Edition and play through them all. They are masterpieces in game storytelling. Mass Effect 1 is arguably not the best Mass Effect game. For some, maybe Mass Effect 2's combat or storyline brings it to a higher level than the first one. Or maybe Mass Effect 3's satisfying conclusion to multiple different characters' story arcs is what brings it to the top. But Mass Effect 1, for all its deep, clunky RPG systems, established it all. It is one of the best RPGs ever made, and is one of my favorite games of all time. Okay, so you had to know that Outer Wilds was going to be on my top 10 list. Outer Wilds is, and probably forever will be, one of my favorite games I've ever played, and arguably one of the best games ever made. I understand if it's not for everyone. I actually do think that the ship flying mechanics in space are fairly realistic, and I love that you have to take into account your trajectory and your destination's trajectory in order to get to where you need to be without crashing and burning. But underneath that surface level gameplay is something more, something to discover. The journey that the game is trying to take you on is a journey of discovering the mysteries of the solar system, discovering why the sun keeps blowing up every 22 minutes. And since you're caught in this loop, then it should be your responsibility to stop it. So you bounce around from planet to planet, reading the inscriptions left by the previous spacefaring race that made its home in your solar system. And eventually you discover what's causing the time loop, why the sun is blowing up, and most importantly, what you can do about it. Now I'm going to spend the rest of talking about Outer Wilds talking about what happened at the end. If you don't want to be spoiled by this, and I really recommend that you experience it for yourself, just fast forward to the next game. You can always come back later and listen to what I have to say about this. Is everyone gone? Good. While you're playing this game, while you're discovering things about the solar system, there starts to be an overarching sense of dread. It starts when you discover the final fate of the Nomai. The Nomai ended up being stranded in your solar system, and their ultimate goal was to find the Eye of the Universe. While they ended up failing finding the Eye of the Universe before they died off, your story starts with the Eye of the Universe being found. And once you discover the coordinates, you can go to it. And it's only when you get to it that you realize that the sun isn't exploding because someone's absorbing all its energy. Nothing diabolical is happening here. It is simply the end of your son's natural life cycle. It turns out the universe is ending, and your son is just one of the last ones to die out. Now, normally something like this would make someone panic. You're effectively seeing the end of your entire way of life firsthand. When I got to the Eye, an overwhelming sense of peace washed over me. Just as I had come to the end of my journey, so too had ended the journey of the universe itself. And then, all the explorers you met along the way of your journey, they all get together to sing a song one last time. This song ends up becoming the basis of the creation of a new universe, beginning with a new Big Bang. You sit back, you relax, you accept the fact that the universe has ended, and you get to move on with your life. I remember feeling like I needed to thrash, I needed to find solution to the problem, all while playing this game. And it's only at the end that I finally came to terms with the inevitable. The universe had to end, and you got to be a part of the next beginning. It was a really powerful moment, something that I don't think would have meant the same if this was a movie or a TV show. Because I had to guide my character through these steps, I felt like I was coming to terms with it as he was. Outer Wilds is an emotional journey. It's an emotional journey that I recommend everyone give a try. Because even if it doesn't speak to you mechanically or story-wise, it may end up speaking to you emotionally, or maybe even existentially. Alright, well after that emotional journey, we are finally on to my number one, my favorite game of all time. And it is none other than The Legend of Zelda: The Wind Waker. When I talked about Super Mario Sunshine in my last video, I mentioned that the GameCube era of Nintendo had a light and airy feel about it. The Wind Waker was no exception. You start off on a tropical island. Link is sleeping, just like he does at the start of every other Zelda game, and he's awoken up by his sister. Wait, Link has family in this game, what? After a series of unfortunate events, your sister is kidnapped, and you go on a quest to save her. And just in the first few hours of the game, you are shot out of a cannon, you land face first against a wall, you lose your sword, you have to sneak around a enemy dungeon in order to get to your sword, and then you are picked up by a giant bird, flicked over into the ocean, and are picked up by a talking boat. This is all in the first few hours of the game. I loved this game for its controversial at the time, light and cartoony graphics. Everyone else wanted a realistic looking Zelda game, and when I saw this, I could not care less about a realistic looking Zelda game. The animations and the art style give this game a timeless quality, one that would have been lost had it been a realistic looking Zelda game. I mean, remember when Ocarina of Time came out and we were like, wow, this looks so realistic. I mean, look at the original game now. It still is beautiful in its own right, but we all know what I mean. The combat in Wind Waker is some of the most satisfying combat. The ability to quote-unquote parry, which is basically just a reactive button press to roll out of the way of an enemy's attack and then attack him from behind. I don't know, it was simple and fun in the way that Twilight Princess, Skyward Sword, and Breath of the Wild weren't able to bring to their combat systems. When Nintendo was releasing Skyward Sword HD last year, they promoted it as a game that had all the cool elements of Breath of the Wild, like the stamina meter and the light crafting and upgrade system. However, I think Wind Waker is the true spiritual predecessor to Breath of the Wild. While there's a little bit more on-rails elements to the beginning of the game, where you're just tasked from going from one dungeon destination to another, once you unlock the ability to explore the entire Great Sea, it really opens up the world. You can now see islands in the distance and just go sail to them. Some of these islands are populated with people, some of them are just little mini dungeons to explore, and some of them have more to discover in the quadrant around them rather than the island themselves. And the open world was entirely seamless, something that Skyward Sword and Twilight Princess definitely can't say. There's a lot of different things that make every Zelda game great, but Wind Waker was the first 3D Zelda game where I really felt a love for exploration, a drive to fill out that map. While a lot of the games on this list all appeal to me for different reasons, Wind Waker's style and form bring it to the very top of my favorite games of all time. I have played and replayed almost every Zelda game over the years. So far, none have given me the joy and satisfaction that the Wind Waker has. This is my favorite game of all time, and at least for now, in the first 30 years of my life, nothing can usurp it. And that's it, everyone. This has been a labor of love that I've worked on for the past few weeks, and I hope the love and passion shines through in my descriptions of these games. Sometimes I think about my gaming journey from first playing Minesweeper on my dad's work laptop to today, and being able to share how I feel about this incredibly powerful entertainment medium, being able to talk about the emotions that it invokes in me to you, has been absolutely my pleasure. Thank you to Chris Davis for putting this video together, and thank you to the rest of the 4Player cast and community for creating a space in which I can express these feelings. I have got to play a lot of video games in the last 30 years of my life, so here's to many more.